Okay, today we are really almost there. We're going to learn Yevamot Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph. Okay, so congratulations to all who've gotten to this point. If you've gotten here, you will get to the end. Okay, a few quick things. Registration for the Siyum, don't forget. If you want to come to the English Siyum, it's on Sunday. We're going to learn tomorrow the beginning of the daf. Make sure to have learned that before you get there. We'll learn to the mission at the bottom of Kuf Chaf Bet at the bottom. And we'll finish from there. We have a great program. You can find all the details. I've already said them a few times, so I won't repeat it. And if you're in Israel and you want to join any of the siyums, there's already starting tonight, there's siyums, and tomorrow night, and I think maybe even on Friday in different places. You can also join the Hebrew Zoom. Even though some of the program looks similar, it will be a little bit different. And yes, and I'm excited. We found someone whose grandmother did Yibum, and she's going to speak at the Hebrew Siyum, so in India. So that'll be really interesting. So, and if you want, you can catch that. All of it will go up on the site, and it'll be recorded. So you can, and it'll be separated by next week. It should be up on the site, separated into different sections of the different parts. You can watch parts of the Siyum. Anyway, looking forward to seeing you all, hopefully at the Zoom on Sunday, and maybe before that as well. Okay, today's dedications. Today's daf is sponsored in honor of Judy Tidor Schwartz's birthday. With love from her daughters, your care and devotion to our family, daily acts of chesed, and endless learning are a true inspiration. Today's daf is dedicated by Becky Goldstein on behalf of her new grandson. With gratitude to the Almighty for our new grandson, Shmuel. Like Shmuel and Avi, Zeh Shmuel HaKaton, Shmuel HaGadol Yiyeh. Blessings of Chokhmah, Yirat Shamayim, Anava, love of Torah, and Avat HaBriot, in good health and simcha and nachat to his whole family. Mazal tov. Okay, let's go back to where we were when we finished. So we ended at the bottom of Kuf Chaf Bet. We were talking about this idea that if someone's two simanim, you cut their esophagus and trachea, they basically are definitely going to die. If they're definitely going to die, then why we start comparing different times when this issue comes up? Why if someone accidentally kills someone, I'm standing there, I drop a knife on a person and it happens to cut their esophagus and trachea, and I don't have to go to the Ir Miklat, which is the city of refuge, to protect me. Now, right, which is both a protection and I won't get into Ir Miklat, but the point is, why am I not considered liable that I killed them for accidentally if I cut their esophagus and trachea? And because of that, we know the person's going to die. To which Rav Ashi explained, it could be there's something else going on here. It's true, I ultimately caused their death, but I began the process of killing them, but something else came along and really caused them to die, or at least there's a good chance of it. And because of that, I don't have to go to an Ir Miklat. So what are the two possibilities? Either ruach bilbalto, the wind came and got into the space inside their body, like his body filled up with air because of it, and the wind kind of came and caused the death. So it's true, it wouldn't have happened had I not dropped the knife there and cut his two simanim, but still, it wasn't me who did the direct killing. Nami iu kirev mitato, or it could be he himself killed himself. Okay, how? Well, I dropped the knife. Now, what happens? I drop the knife, cuts the esophagus and trachea, and the body starts to flail. Now, when the body flails, it could be as it hit up against the hard floor, that kind of knocked the person to their death. So it could be that that's what's going on here. So now they say and that's why I don't have to go to Ir Miklat, even though, again, what was our whole point? The point was, if this happens to someone, for sure they're going to die. So even if you see them in this situation and you don't actually watch them finally die, you can be sure that they're dead and you can testify the fact that they died and their wife can go get remarried. So my binai, what's the difference whether you say it was the wind or it was the person's flailing body that killed them? Well, let's say you did it in a house made of marble. Exactly what they mean here. But the point is probably there's no windows, there's no air coming in. So then there's no ruach in the house. So it can't be that the wind got through because there is no wind. So if you find a place where there's no wind at all, but yet the body flailed, then there would be a difference whether you say it was either the wind or the body flailing. Inami deshachti babara below parkis. Or you did it outside where there was wind, but the body didn't flail at all. Then you can't say it was flailing that caused it, but you could say it was the wind. Let's go back to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. If you haven't yet read, by the way, Shuli Mishkan's entry last week, it was all about Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. And she talks about his personality and some stories about him, which are very interesting. And he's really a central figure here. Number one, he started off with the whole heter of accepting women's testimony to allow, right, that you can even testify about your own husband, he's died, to allow a woman to remarry. He saw a big need and he said, I'm going to act upon this. Okay, he's from the Yevamot generation. You can read up about him. It's very interesting. There's a very famous story about him also, which I'm not going to give away, but it's in flashback. The second thing he says here is when they said about identifying men actually not men, well, here it's really men because they want to allow the women to remarry. Again, for the purposes of remarrying, in order to determine the death of someone, the question is, how many days can elapse that you can still say, I recognize this is this person, I can still identify them. So the Tanakhama had said 3 days, and came Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and said, not everybody's the same, not every place is the same, right? It all depends. To which they say, Now, if you look at Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava in general, you'd have to assume that he's going to be lenient here because his whole thing was being lenient. But the Gemara doesn't kind of assume that. And they say, is he trying to be stricter and saying maybe even less than 3 days? It could be a really hot day, and maybe within a day already you can't identify the person. Or is he being more stringent, more lenient to allow even 5 days, 6 days? So let's see from this source. Tashma, Tahu Gavla de Tava Bakarme. There was a person who drowned in Karme. Askuhu Abehadya. They picked him up out of the water in this place called Behadya. He was dead. Lebatar Taltzin Yomin, after 3 days had passed. They identified him, obviously, and they allowed his wife to remarry. So now, Vitu, and there was another case. So Gavar de Itba Diglat, okay, another guy who drowned in the Diglat is forget. Someone can tell me what it is, but I forget it's the Tigris, I think, is the Diglat. Va'askua Gishra de Shabistina. Yeah, it is the Tigris, thanks. And they took him out on the bridge of Shispitina. They took a Shushbanin as ushers, like his closest friends, and they identified him after 5 days. So now we have this issue, right? This is clear proof. If you say Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was lenient, then these rabbis must have been operating according to his opinion. But if you say he's being more strict, then you have nobody who allows it after 3 days or 5 days. Inu David Kiman, who on earth were they holding like? To which the Gemara says this doesn't prove anything. Why? Because they were in the water. When we talked about 3 days or maybe more, maybe less, then that was all about someone on land. Because if you're on land, your body's going to get ruined. But Shani Maya did something. In the water, everything kind of, it contracts. And therefore, it keeps it from swelling. What causes a person to be unidentifiable? Apparently, according to the Gemara, swelling. That doesn't happen when you're in the water. Okay, if you read the book, I think it's called Into Thin Air. I forget exactly the name of the title, but it's about a guy who goes to Everest. And I think it starts off, if I remember correctly, he gets to Everest. His father had died many years before, and he sees his father frozen in Everest. And he looks just like him. Yeah, Into Thin Air with John Krakauer. Thank you. And he basically sees this face that looks like his own face. It's even younger than he is at the time. He realizes he's older than his father was when he died. And you can really, he says it was all, now that's frozen, might be a little different than water. And some people actually say it's only in cold water, because in cold water, it freezes not in, there's a whole discussion about this, halacha l'maaseh, how we hold. Anyway, the water keeps its form and keeps it from swelling. But wait, didn't we just say before, remember the thing with the leg, if they find the leg cut, and then they had a whole thing, can't it heal? And then we said, oh no, because the water prevents it from healing properly. So here we're saying on the one hand, the water is better for you. Then we say the water is worse for you. It doesn't seem to make sense. So they say, no, if there's a wound and something's cut off, then the water is going to ruin it. But the body's intact. Maka mitzmatzami. Deleka makaf. There's no, then mitzmatzami. Then the body basically stays in place. This, by the way, is only if when they take you out of the water, you look at it right away. But if you take it out of the water and then you wait a few days or you wait some time, then already it's going to swell. We mean that it was in the water and you looked at it soon after it got out of the water. They don't specify exactly how much time. Okay. In any case, this doesn't help us with the Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Was he stringent or lenient? We don't really know. Okay, we're left without an answer, even though, again, seemingly he's being more lenient because in the other case, he was trying to matir agunot, right? To allow agunot to get married. Thank you, Ruth, for pointing out that, right, it does say b'sha'ateh. So what Ruth said is that it seems to say sha'ateh is within the hour. If you take that literally, that means within 1 hour of taking it out of the water, you have to look at it. Okay. Now, by the way, I want to point out there's in the discussion among the commentaries that what kind of identification, there's two ways of identifying. We talked about this yesterday. There's what's called simanim, right? Some mark. And if it's a mark, that's a clear mark, right? We had a whole discussion, which marks are identifiable, which ones can you use, which ones can't use. If it's one that you can use, then even some people say even after 3 days, 5 days, it doesn't make a difference. That still could be an identifiable feature. What we're talking about here is face recognition, like tviyut eina, which means you look at a person, you say, oh, I know who that is. I recognize them for sure. That's something that you won't have tviyut ayin. That's what the debate is. Is it after 3 days, or does it sort of depend on the situation, according to Rav Yehuda ben Bava? We're talking about something that's not simanim. If they have a mark on their body, that mark might still be there. Again, there was a whole discussion. Maybe this is a mark that changes after death. Maybe, right, a mole does change after death. A mole doesn't change. But if it's something that's assumed not to change, then it seems like this 3-day thing wouldn't be relevant. Okay, now we're starting a really big and important sugya, okay, which is going to take us through most of the daf. This is the 9/11 sugya, okay? It's all about if somebody, okay, it's really more, they're talking about boats, but it's similar to other situations, which is nafal l'mayim. Somebody falls in the water, bein sheyesh lahem sof, bein she'en lahem sof, whether it's water that doesn't have any end to it or does have an end to it, okay? A finite body of water, okay? We can, right, like an ocean, gigantic, and who knows where they'll end up. We'll have to see. The Gemara is going to say what exactly, how can you tell the difference between water that's a closed area of water or an open area of water? Either which way, ishto asura. You have no idea what happened to this person. They could have gotten out in some place. They could have survived, okay? We have no idea. Okay, there's also all these famous stories of people who were in the water for days and days and days on end and somehow managed to survive. And also, the issue is, number one, can they survive? Number two, are we able to find them? Right? 9/11 is a little different because it's not necessarily in a body of water where they could have ended up somewhere else, right? But there was this whole discussion after class yesterday about, people who used it as an excuse to run away and escape their life and try to, get out of it and, hoping people would just think they had gone there, right? The Titanic is a great example. Okay, so all these are examples. In fact, I'll even bring an interesting psak halacha that happened at a certain time to create a whole big uproar in the time of Rav Yosef Karo in the 1500s. We'll talk about that soon. Okay. Amar Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says, here's my proof. Somebody fell into a pit and he came out after 3 days. You might have thought, no way can a person survive for 3 days in a pit. And here you see, this is why you shouldn't allow their wives to marry. Amar Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi disagrees. He says, when you maaseh besuma, sheyarad litbol b'ma'ara, v'yarad moshcho acharav, v'shu kedei shetimtza nafshan, v'isiu et nafshotehen. There was a case where a blind person went into a cave. This is what we call mayim sheyesh lahem sof. We see the end, okay? So now, right, he was blind. So he, Becky, your Rabbi Yosef was blind, not Rabbi Yosi. I don't think Rabbi Yosi was blind as far as I know. You might be confusing with Rabbi Yosef, unless you tell me that Rabbi Yosi definitely was blind. I don't know that that's the case. I don't think so. But there was a case with a blind person who went to dip in a cave, and his moshcho, his helper, who helped him find things, went with him. And they stayed down there. We didn't see them for X amount of time. They don't say how much time, but enough time that they didn't think they were able to survive. And they allowed their wives to remarry. So here you see, this was mayim sheyesh lahem sof. There is bounds to them. It was in a cave, and I'm sorry, in a pit, right? What was it? Sorry, it was a cave. It was water in a cave. So that's a closed area. They didn't come out, and we allowed them to remarry. So now, there was another case, and this we saw before the other day. They lowered someone down to the water, but when they picked him back up, all they ended up was his leg. Again, what's the issue here? If the leg was cut from the bottom part, and all you have is that, maybe the guy survived. But if it was from above his knee, there's no way a person could survive that way without their leg. So it must be they died. Okay, so again, here, what do you see? If it was from below the leg, we basically assume that the person could still be alive. Okay, now this would have to be in a case where Mayim she'ein lahem sof, because then we don't know if they're still alive. We would have seen them, but not if ein lahem sof. Okay, so the basic thing to remember, it's a little bit confusing, especially because they're kind of telling a lot of stories and not being so clear about what they're talking about. But the main thing is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi, and the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yosi, disagree about whether Rabbi Yosi and the rabbis hold. They distinguish between mayim sheyesh lahem sof and mayim she'ein lahem sof. The water has no bounds or does have bounds. If it has bounds, you can assume the person's dead if you don't see them. If it has no bounds, you have no idea. Maybe they got out somewhere else and maybe they're still alive. Okay, I'll mention right now before we get into the details, but there was a case that, and this is what I was mentioning before, the Mabit, okay, he's one of these rabbis. At the time, he said basically that there was a case where a boat drowned, it sunk, intact, okay? And he permitted all the wives of those men to remarry. And Rav Yosef Karo got very upset with him. He said, what are you talking about? Right? This was mine, right? It was considered mayim sheyesh, 1 second. Right. So he basically was mayim she'ein lahem sof. And therefore, Rav Yosef Karo said, I don't know on what basis you're maltering. And he claimed that it wasn't a case of nafal hayam. What is nafal hayam? You fall out of the boat into the water. He claims they fell in the boat with the boat intact. That's something different. And based on that, right, what do you see here? You see that the interest in trying to come up with some sort of heter. So he allowed this. The rabbis at the time and Rav Yosef Karo behind them, basically went out against him very strongly. He did not change his mind. He was very serious that he thought these women should remarry. You can obviously imagine all the uproar, right? All these women who remarried based on that, and then people saying, oh, you can't do that. And what's interesting about it is, even though people didn't really hold by him, and this is the way halacha works, that even when people don't hold by a particular rabbi at the particular time, later, in other cases that come up, his became the famous approach on which, if you had some other safek, you can add to it that the Mabit said this, and then you can build your heter based on that. And that's often how things work in the world of psikat halacha. That someone might say something at a certain point, which actually isn't accepted by the majority of people. But because he said it in another situation, if the details are a little different, and we have already another reason, it's called a snif lahatil. We have already another reason to be more lenient for whatever reason. Then we can add this to the picture and say, oh, well, based on that, and since the Mabit said this, we can kind of, allow it. So his became a very central position in all of these debates about things like 9/11, et cetera. Sure, there's lots to read up about it, about, what they did in 9/11 and different psikot halacha that there were, again, not for daf Yomi, but for extra reading material. Tano Rabbanan. So now we're going to have a lot more discussion about this, and we're going to see lots of situations. Okay, if we talk about, again, between the Masechet goes back and forth between totally theoretical, unrealistic cases that probably never happened, and then these very real, very actual cases. Tano Rabbanan. Nafal l'mayim ben sheyesh lahem sof ben she'ein lahem sof ishto asura. First, we're going to see a braita that shows Rabbi Meir versus the rabbis, which clearly sound like Rabbi Yosi, and this is how we know they do because of this braita. So if someone falls in the water, whether they have no bounds or they have bounds, ishto asura, their wife is forbidden. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Chachamim omrim mayim sheyesh lahem sof ishto muteret. If there's bounds and we don't see them come out, we can assume they're dead. V'she'ein lahem sof ishto asura. Only if you can't see the boundaries, then their wife is forbidden. Hechidami mayim sheyesh lahem sof. Finally, we get a definition. If you can see land on all four sides, that's called mayim sheyesh lahem sof. If you can't see land on all four sides, then it's mayim she'ein lahem sof, because they could go on and who knows where they could have been carried. Haul Gavra. Okay, now we have a person. Tava ba'ad went to Samkin. He drowned in the lake of Samkin. Insiba Rav Shila l'debitu. Rav Shila married off his wife. Now we're going to see that this water was water she'en lehem sof. Rav Shila permitted this. Amalu Rav l'Shmuel tanishante. Let's put him in nidor. Rav says to Shmuel, you have to understand this little background again if you want to read up more about it. Rabbi Shila was the Rosh Hashiva there, and Rav came in as a student, and then he realized his greatness. And anyway, I think there was probably a little bit of political issues between them. And if you read the story in this light, you can see that. So Rav says to Shmuel, I don't like this decision that Rav Shila made. Let's excommunicate him, right? That's like pretty serious. Why did he allow this woman to marry when she really can't, right? He could be alive. Amar le, so Shmuel says to him, not so fast. Nishlach le b'reisha. Okay, today you're going to learn a lot of what we call musal haskel. Okay, good advice. So Shmuel says, why don't we first ask him what exactly happened? So Rav says, okay, fine. Shalchule. So they asked him the following thing. First, they asked him, right, very innocently, what do you hold about water that has no bounds, or you can't see, no visible end? Is she permitted or forbidden? Shalach lehu, he sends back Rav Shila, ishto asura. Okay, they're like, oh, well, that fits with what we hold. And then they ask, okay, agma de samke, this lake that we have here, mayim sheyesh lehem sof, mayim she'en lehem sof. How do you define that lake of water, that body of water? Shalach lehu mayim she'en lehem sofu. He says that's water that has no visible end. Okay, so then they say to him, wait a minute, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. You have a case of mayim she'en lehem sof, and you think mayim she'en lehem sof, the wife is forbidden, and yet you permitted this woman. So Mari, my time averachi, why did you do that? Mita te'ina, he says, I made a mistake. Okay, why did I make a mistake? Ana savre, I misunderstood. This is a good tip for poskei halacha. Get your facts straight, right? Go learn about the place. He said, I thought kevan dekavu v'kaime, that the water was stagnant. Kemayim sheyesh lehem sof dami. I thought that this lake was mayim sheyesh lehem sof, because I thought the waters were stagnant. But it turns out it wasn't. Kevan deika gale, it turns out there's waves in there. Imor gale ishpalu. I realized later that the waves could have carried him away. So when I paskin, I was wrong. Okay, I realized I made a mistake. So now, wow, they're relieved that they didn't put him in excommunicate, right? You don't excommunicate someone for making a mistake. You excommunicate someone for making a psak halacha, and ruling that's something against what everybody holds. But he wasn't ruling against, he just misunderstood the facts. Now, that in itself is a problem, but it's not something that's worthy of excommunication. Kari Shmuel alei de Rav, Shmuel said about Rav. Okay, so now Shmuel and Rav look at each other, and each one has a reaction to what happened. Because now they look at themselves. Now, what's interesting is here is that we're talking about a sugya of possibly making a mistake about, is someone dead, is someone not dead? Then we have this case where someone actually made a mistake about trying to figure out which kind of water it was, and he was confused about it. Then we have these rabbis who almost made a mistake about excommunicating someone. So they're talking about their mistake, but it's interesting because it has effects on, this whole thing is about making mistakes, and the whole sugya is about making mistakes. So I see you're asking, I'll stop for a second because I see in the chat you're asking about the woman. So we'll see that this is all lechatchila, but b'diavad, if she's married, it's okay. So that's a separate thing. So now, Kari Shmuel alei de Rav, Shmuel says to Rav, and he says about Rav, lo yu'uneh et l'tzadik kol avin. Okay? Bad things don't happen to, mistakes don't come to, or sins don't come to tzaddikim, and that's why Rav was saved from excommunicating this person. Kari, right? He almost says it's like almost a bit of a miraculous way. And Kari Rav alei de Shmuel, shu'a berov yoetz. Rav says about Shmuel, no, the salvation is from having a good advisor. In other words, it wasn't like miraculously God's hand that did it. It was, I had a good advisor. You were smart enough to tell me not to excommunicate him right away and to look into the details. And you learn here, right? Don't jump the gun. Search as much as you can. And it's the same thing for this issue of finding people, right? Even though they're talking about the excommunication issue, it's also true for, you see a situation, you assume someone's dead. Don't jump to the conclusion. Do as much research as you possibly can. If you're stuck after that, then, we'll deal with it past that. But, try to do as much research as possible. Tanya, Amar Rebbe, Maaseh b'shnei bnei adam mechmorim bayarden. V'nichnas achad mehem lemechila shel dagim. There was a case where 2 people were fishing with nets in the water. And in the Jordan, one of them ended up going into this cave where there were ponds of fish. It got dark and he couldn't find the exit or the entrance. So he got stuck. So the friend who was outside waited enough time where he basically decided this guy's clearly dead. He can't possibly survive longer than this. And he lets his family know that his friend that he went down with to fish is dead. The next day, the sun rose. He found the exit to the cave. He sees his whole family mourning his loss. Right? Crazy story. They said, wow, how great, right? Rabbi says, how great are the words of the Chachamim. In other words, here we're proven right. Who said, if there's mayim sheyesh lemsof, then you can assume he's not coming out. But this mechilah dagim was in a mayim she'en lemsof, and that's why ishto is asura, because, they thought he was dead and it turned out he was still alive. To which they say, wait a minute, this doesn't have to do with mayim sheyesh lemsof, mayim she'en lemsof. This has to do with, there was a fish, right? There was a cave with a fish pond in it, underwater, right? Where I'm assuming, I don't know exactly what a fish pond, like a cave with a fish pond looks like, but I assume there was some space that was maybe above the water also, where there was some air. I don't know exactly. But it sounds like he was saved because he was in this mechila, or that maybe it was there and it's possible he was saved because of that, and therefore we should worry that maybe in a mayim sheyesh lemsof, so maybe someone's stuck in this mechilah dagim, and that's why they didn't come out and we can't find them. To which they answer, but mayim sheyesh lemsof mechilah dagim lo shchicha. You don't generally have these ponds in a closed body of water, only in a big open body of water. Again, whether all this is true or not, I can't say, but these are assumptions that the Gemara makes. Amar Rav Ashi. Now Rav Ashi comes with a huge heter, okay? Again, what's the issue here? Number one, did the person die? Can you assume they died, right? He assumed it was enough time the guy couldn't have survived. Turns out he did, right? That's one issue that's variable here. Number two issue is, could the person have gotten out? And if so, will we find them? So the assumption is, right, if it's mayim she'en lemsof, the person could be so far away that we would have no idea. But not only that, but that nobody knows who they are there, right? And therefore, it would be less likely to find them. So comes Rav Ashi with a huge heter. He says, actually, it's not a huge heter. It's a chumrah. Sorry. Wait a minute. Okay, let's read it and then I'll get, because right now I'm confused for a minute. Amar Rav Ashi, Hada Amru Rabbanan, Mayim she'en lemsof ishto asura. Right. Okay, it's a big heter. If you say, big body of water, you can't see the end of it, assume, even if he got out, we'd have no way of knowing. And therefore, his wife can't get remarried. That's only a regular person. But a Talmid Chacham, who's famous, okay, in those days, right, it's nice, the celebs were Talmidei Chachamim, okay, people who are known entities, okay, them, lo. Why? We assume if somebody, Talmid Chacham, Rav, let's say, okay, Rav drowns, and he gets out, or I don't know, let's take Rabbi Akiva, because we're going to see a story where he drowns. Rabbi Akiva, very known name, he drowns, okay, but somehow gets out in some godforsaken place. The assumption is those people know him also. Okay, I don't know how their word got around so much, depending on how far we're talking about. Maybe their distances, they weren't thinking of distances nowadays. I don't know. But they get out so far off. Everybody knows then their word will get back to us that he's alive. So his wife can actually get remarried. It doesn't say or how much time has to pass, because obviously time has to pass for him to get out of the water, get to a place where people know him, and then the word has to get back to them, which obviously would take some time. But we could assume his wife could get remarried because everyone would know. Velohi, but the Gemara says this is not true. And here comes the answer to what someone was asking before. It doesn't matter who. Let's start with lechatchila. Lechatchila, his wife cannot get remarried. But b'diavad, if she already did get remarried, we let her stay married. Okay, we don't make her get divorced from him. Okay, so that's what you were asking before. What happens if she already got married? But we don't rule that she can actually get married. We're going to see this line again later. Okay, here comes, I told you, Rabbi Akiva. So we saw a bunch of stories about Rabbi Akiva in this Masechah. We saw about how he was in jail. Now we're going to see how he almost drowned and they thought he was dead. Okay, all sorts of things happened to him in his life, not to mention his horrible death. Tanya, right, in the hands of the Romans. Tanya Amar Rabban Gamliel. One time I was in a boat. While I was out in the water, often was on boats. If you want to learn about boat travel, and you can read about flashback. Today went up, yesterday went up, is all about boats and these kind of cases. I saw a boat that was broken. And then I was very upset about the Talmid Chacham that was in the boat. Umanu, who was that? Rabbi Akiva. I got to land, and in comes Rabbi Akiva into my court and starts, and he's ruling in halacha. Whoa, where did you come from? I thought you were dead. Amarti lo b'ni, I said, how did you get out of that? Amar lo, okay, here's the source for surfing in the Gemara. Daf shel sfinan nizdamen, part of the boat was there, I grabbed onto it. Every wave that came, I just basically put my head down and I was able to ride the waves. Another musar haskel. If evil people are coming to attack you, just put your head down. Okay, right? This is a good advice. Okay, just like he put his head down when the waves were coming to attack him. Sometimes if you just go, surrender to it, you'll ride the waves, right? So this is good advice in life. Ride the waves. Don't make too much of don't make a big deal of anything. Don't stand up and start fighting against people. If you just let it go, right? Like you always say, the bullies, right? The bullies pick on the people who get the most upset about it because they see, oh, this is good prey. So basically, if you ride the waves and you just kind of put your head down and ignore it, it'll be the best way to get through things. Interesting. They have all these quips in today's daf about good advice about life. Amarti, ba'ota sha'a. I said at that moment, Rabban Gamliel says, Kama gdolim divrei chachamim. You keep seeing this, by the way, right? Because I think they were really concerned about this issue. On the one hand, you want to allow all these women to remarry. On the other hand, you certainly don't want to allow them to remarry if the person's alive. So all these situations of people who kind of, so to speak, came back to life, they thought they were dead. So, wow, it was smart that the rabbi said, Ma'im she'esh lem sof muteret, ma'im she'en lem sof asura. That only when it's in a finite space do we allow it, but not if it's this infinite space and who knows where they could be and they could show up. Tanya, funny that the story happens in the reverse. I'm a Rabbi Akiva. In this case, Rabbi Akiva is going to be in Rabban Gamliel's position. I was in a boat. I saw a boat that was starting to sink. Right? In the first case, it was the boat broke. In this case, the boat's starting to sink. I felt so bad about the Talmid Chacham that was there. I was so sad he was dying. Umanu Rabbi Meir, and I was sure he had died. When I got to the city of Kapotkia, there was Rabbi Meir teaching halacha, right, ruling on people's, court cases. Amarti lo, b'ni mi halcha, how did you get out? Amarli, gal tchadani lechavero v'chavero lechavero ad shitiyani yabasha. The waves basically took me to the dry land, and that's how I was saved. Amarti b'ota sha'an, and he said at that moment, kamak dolim divrei chachamim shamru, ma'im shesh lem sof isho muteret, ma'im she'en lem sof isho asura. By the way, it's possible these are just two different versions of the same story, and it's whether Rabbi Akiva was in the position of the one drowning or the one commenting. It's possible because it's obviously the exact same story. Could be just also told in the same words, even if it didn't exactly happen the same way. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, okay, that was water. What about other situations? What if you fall into a lion's den? You can't assume the person died. It's possible he got saved from there. If you're in a ditch full of snakes and scorpions, then you can assume the person died. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera Omer, even in that situation, you don't, because turning out on the bet, maybe he's a charmer, a snake charmer. Maybe he knows how to, manipulate them. V'tanakama, why don't they think that? He's on top of them. Usually a snake charmer is to the side. If you're in a ditch with them, you're on top of them, they're for sure going to bite you and kill you. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright about this. You fall into a fiery furnace. They can testify about you that you're dead. No way you could survive that. What about a yoreh male'ah yayin v'shemen? If you fall into a cauldron, boiling cauldron full of wine and oil, mi'idim alav. Okay, again, you can assume they died. Right? If, let's say, what happens when you fall into a cauldron? Oil spills out. What happens when oil spills out? It'll get to the fire. It'll actually keep the fire going. But shel yayin emi dimala, right? Imagine when you put something in a pot of water, sometimes the water overflows and then it puts out the fire. So same thing will happen with the wine. So if you fall into a cauldron of wine, it won't keep boiling because the wine will spill out and put out the fire. Amrulo, they said to him, what are you talking about, Rabbi Acha? Here's an experiment to do at home and see what happens. The wine, they claim, first starts putting it out, but then it actually catches higher on fire and burns more. I don't know on what basis they say that. Maybe someone here who's an expert will be able to tell me. Okay. Amar Rabbi Meir, there was a case of someone who fell into a big pit. Remember, Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah said that. And right, what it was the case? He fell into a big pit and he came out after 3 days. So now, it's a good question about finding a body in a cauldron. I'm not sure why they couldn't find the body in the cauldron. It's a good question. Tanya Amrula the Rabbi Meir. That case of the guy in a pit, that was a miracle. Nobody could survive in this bor gadol for 3 days. It was full of water. No way, no how. It was a miracle. You don't bring proof from miracles. So, what exactly was the miracle? If it's because he didn't eat or drink for 3 days, that's not true. People can survive not eating, not drinking for 3 days. If you want to try experimenting things, I don't know which one is worse to try to go into a cauldron of, you don't have to go into the cauldron. You could just fill a cauldron with wine. I wouldn't try not eating, not drinking for 3 days and seeing if it works. But how do we know it works? But you could do it. Who said that? Esther, remember? Don't eat and don't drink for 3 days. Okay. So I don't know if they ate at night, but let's just assume maybe they didn't. So it seems from here again, they don't prove things from science. They prove things from sources. Ela dilonayim. But we're going to see from another halachic source, it's not possible to not sleep for 3 days. Okay. This one I wouldn't recommend trying, but Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan. How do we know this? Because Rabbi Yochanan says, let's say I swear I won't sleep for 3 days. Now, there's no such thing. Thanks for pointing that out. She does say Laila v'yom. Yeah, she says Laila v'yom. So there you have it. It was at night. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. But if you say, I swear I won't sleep for 3 days, that's what we call a shvua cheker. It's not, or a shvua chap. It's a wasted shvua, swearing for no reason, because there's no possibility of you not sleeping for 3 days. So what do? Malkino. So you get lashes for doing that because you're not allowed to swear for no reason. And yashen la'alto, you can go to sleep right away because your shvua is not valid at all. So there you see, that was the miracle. He didn't sleep for 3 days. Now, Rabbi Meir, who didn't think it was a miracle, my timer, Amarav Kahana, well, what's the reason he couldn't sleep for 3 days? The assumption is, right, maybe there was some airspace in there, but you would have to be standing up. If you lie down, you'll be underwater and you won't survive. So he must have been standing up and sleeping, but people don't stand up and sleep. There's no such thing. Okay. So they claim, I don't know, maybe people have done it, but they assume he couldn't have been sleeping standing up, so he must not have slept. Comes Rabbi Meir and he says, Rav Kahana explains Rabbi Meir saying, Kifan al gabe kifan. There were these arches in there, okay, or types of things inside, and he managed to basically lean on them and would sleep on that. Okay, so there was something to kind of lean on and sleep his body on that was outside the water. For Rabbanan, the rabbis say they were made of marble and they were slippery, and there's no way you could hang on to it. For Rabbi Meir, important. But Meir says even though they were made of marble, there was still something to hold on to, and he could grab like 3 minutes of sleep or something, big power naps, and that saved him. So again, it's an interesting debate about whether this was of a miraculous nature and then you can't learn from it, or it was really not a miraculous nature and then you could learn from it. Tano Rabbanit, Maaseh bebito shel Nechunya chofer shichim. There's a guy in Nechunya chofer shichim. We learned about him in Shkalim. He would dig ditches, if you remember, in order to have water for the ole regalim, so that when people came on Aliyah Regal, they'd have water to drink. His daughter, I can't remember if this story is very familiar to me. I know it comes up in Bava Kama. Could be it also came up in Shkalim and we saw it already, but in any case, you'll tell me if you remember, because Bava Kama we haven't gotten to yet this cycle. So those who are new might remember it. Anyway, it's an interesting story. His daughter, Nafla lebor hagadol, okay, he was the digger of the wells. She falls into a well and is about to die. Remember, he's the miracle man from Masechet Ta'anit. Sha'ar Rishona Amar Lahem Shalom. He prays the first hour. He says she's okay. She's not dead yet. Shniya Amar Lahem Shalom. Second hour also she's not dead. Shlishit Amar Lahem Alta. He says she got out of it. Amar la. So they go and they find her, and she's alive. They said, how'd you get out? There was an elderly man with a flock of I think they're ewes. I always forget exactly what each type is, but it's some type of sheep. Amrulo, Navia. So, and basically they helped me get out. Amrulo, they go back to Rabbi Chanina Mendoza and they say, Naviata, wow, you're a prophet. How did you know? So thank you. It's a ram. Okay. Amar lahem, lo navi anochi, velo ben navi anochi. Ela davar shatzadik mitasek bo yikashel bo zaro. I'm not a navi. I'm not the son of a navi, but I do know one thing, which is if he dug wells and did it as a mitzvah, right, to help other people, there's no way that his daughter would have died through that same thing. There's no way. Okay. It can't be that his children would fall trap into the things that he did for the people. Amar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba somewhat disagrees with this because he says, Afal pichen make beno bat sama. His son died of thirst. Okay, so despite the statement that people won't, right, specifically the thing that he provided to everybody, which was water, caused the death of his son, and his son died of thirst. So it's not exactly wholly true. And to which they explain, Shenemal, very famous lines here, Svivav nisara me'od, okay, which are the people around him. Nisara me'od was nisara mean. God is very careful and exacting with the people closest to him, like a hair, something the thinness of a hair, meaning any little thing that they do, they could get severely punished for. Okay, it's one of those reasons to explain. It doesn't really explain it, but Sadiq Virala, when bad things happen to good people, so God is much more careful with those who are closest to him. Apropos, right, the sin of Moshe we just read about or are going to read about this week, depending on where you're living. Rabbi Chanina Amar Mehacha, he says we learn it from a different pasuk. El na'arot ne'erat besok kedoshim rabbah. God is most exacting or severe with the kedoshim rabbah, those who are the most sanctified. V'dorah al kol svivav, and his awesomeness on all those who surround him. Okay, now we get to a new mission. Now we're talking about how we can accept, what kind of testimony can be accepted about a man who died. So we already learned this, but we're going to hear right now. Afilu shama min anashim omrot met ish ploni dayo. Even if you hear women talking, okay, it's not just testifying in court, but you hear women saying, okay, Rashi says, shalo hayu mitkavnim la'id. It's called mesichot lefi tumam. They're just having a conversation. And they say so-and-so had died. So in conversation, that's sufficient. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu shama min atinokot omrim. If you hear a group of kids saying, we're going to eulogize and bury so-and-so, you can assume he's dead and let his wife marry. We're going to have to understand what this mitkaven, whether they intended to testify, whether they didn't intend to testify. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Omer, B'Yisrael, Afal Pishu mitkaven. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says if it's Israel, even if he's intending. But Bovei Kochavim, im haya mitkaven, eini duto edu. When it comes to Gentiles, we have to be suspicious. We're suspicious the Gentiles are trying to possibly mess us up. So if they come to testify, we can't accept their testimony. Now we're going to have to figure out in the Gemara, where exactly do we draw the line? What does it mean mitkaven? What exactly are we mitkavnim about? And this is all, again, to let the wife get married. So now, Dilma lo azi. So now they say, maybe when they say we're going to bury someone, maybe they thought the person was dead, and in the end, the person wasn't dead. So they say, Rav Shmuel, he says, say, no, it's when they say we're coming from the funeral and we've already buried him. Then you can. If they're on their way, you can't accept it. To which the Gemara asks my favorite question. You talk about the creativity of the rabbis. Maybe it was a grasshopper and they called the grasshopper by the name of their neighbor. And then, right, and then they end up, right, how many times the kids collect all sorts of creatures, and then the creature dies, and they make a whole funeral ceremony for it. Apparently, in the times of the Gemara, they did so as well. Maybe they called the creature by someone's name, and they were talking about the funeral of and the eulogies of the creature. Okay, kids like to do that kind of thing. To which the Gemara says, okay, so you can only accept it if they say when they say these eulogizers were there, these rabbis were there, then you can assume, okay, because rabbis and eulogizers don't come to funerals of creatures, creepy crawlers that the kids bury. Okay, funny line. Okay, now we're getting to the Gentiles. It's only if What's the problem with a Gentile? It's if he comes to court and wants to testify someone died, we actually can accept it. We can't accept it if he intends to let the man, if he comes there to allow the woman to marry. Then we don't trust him. How do you know? Rav Yosef, if he says so-and-so died, marry his wife off to someone, then it's clear. But if he just says the person died, and you can accept it. Says the exact same thing. But comes Rabbi Yochanan, or some people say shitris, he went out against 85 zkenim, amar lahem, lo shanu ela nitkaven la'atil, aval nitkaven la'ire duto edut. That's what he said, what you said, Rish Lakish. But lohodu lo chachamim, the rabbis didn't agree with Rabbi Yoshai. They didn't think that was okay. Again, there's this scale. And the question is, where do we draw the line? There's nitkaven to say she should get married. There's nitkaven to just come to court and testify the person's dead. Rish Lakish says that's okay. Comes Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no. Only if in the course of conversation he mentioned that, we were talking, so-and-so died. That we can accept, but not if he's coming to court. If he's coming to court, we already suspect he's trying to ultimately get to let her remarry and mess us up, basically. So now, again, you have to remember, all the sugyas of Gentiles all have to be understood in the light that the Gentiles living then were, many of them, not all of them, but there were Gentiles that were out to kill Jews, out to be against Jews, anti-Semitic, and because of that, these type of sugyot develop where they start to be suspicious of them. So now we're going to have some stories, and we'll end with them. Someone starts shouting in the streets, who knows Ben Chivai? Who knows Ben Chivai? Ben Chivai died. Then you can assume they're not testifying, they're just saying. Rav Yosef Rav Yosef said his wife could get married. Oi to that horseman who died who was in Pumbedita and died. Again, he's just walking around the street saying, "Oh, I feel so bad for that guy who died." Either Rava or Rav Yosef permitted his wife to get remarried. Who's in the house of Chasa? Tava Chasa. Chasa drowned. Right? So he's looking for some relative. Rav Nachman, Elokim, Achluk Far El Chasa. Rav Nachman says, I swear it must be that the fish ate him up. Rav Nachman. Now, Nachman just said this. From what he said, his wife went and got remarried. She didn't go to the court and say, do you rule this? She just went and did it. And they didn't stop her. Rav Ashi, and this is where we get the halacha that we said before, that if she already got remarried, we let it go. Even though really, this was Ma'am Sheish Self, they shouldn't have allowed it. Some people say that that's not the way the story went. Rav Nachman actually married the wife. First, they brought the story because they thought it was a case of Mesiach Lefi Tumo. It wasn't a Gentile here, it was Rav Nachman. But he made a statement based on that. She followed it, and then we let it go. Here it says Rav Nachman actually ruled that she could get remarried. Amar and but the whole thing was based on, that's the important part, it was based on this Mesiach Lefi Tumo of the Nochri, right? It was based on this Nochri who said, where's someone from the house of Chasa? He died. Some people said that based on that, Rav Nachman said she could get remarried. Amar Chasa Gava Rabbi Itai, Im Ita Desali Kala Itlay Milta. But then they said to him, no, he was a big name. And the reason he allowed it was because Chasa is a big name, and if everyone would know him, and if he was really alive, we would have heard about it. So even though it was Ma'am She'en himself, we still could permit it. I said before Ma'am Sheish himself, I meant the opposite. It's Ma'am She'en himself. Sorry, I got confused. But Lohi, Loshna Gavaraba, Lav Gavaraba, it doesn't really make a difference whether he was known or not known. This is exactly what we saw before. The Evid in Lechatchila. This has nothing to do with that. Really, Lechatchila, like Rav Nachman shouldn't have married her off. But B'di'evid, since she's already married, though, we let it go. Okay, with that, we'll end for today. We're going to have more stories and more situations like this. And tomorrow we learn as usual in the morning. We'll learn up to the Mishnah. And at the Siyum, we will finish the Masechet later. The intros, Gita's intro is up for Ketubot, so make sure to read it. And Ayela's intros, I hope, will go up later today. Okay, stop here for today. Have a great day, everyone.